So first of all, I want to welcome Prabha Kotiswaran. She is a professor of law and social justice at King's College London. Her main research areas include criminal law, transnational criminal law, feminist legal studies, and the sociology of law. And she has authored and edited numerous books and journal articles, like her best-selling work, Dangerous Sex, Invisible Lives, Sex Work and the Law in India, and Governance, Feminism, and Introduction. Her research has received funding from an Arts and Humanities Research Council, Economic and Social Research Council, Leverhulme Trust, Journal of Law and Society, and Institute for Policy Law and for Global Law and Policy, Harvard Law School. And she was awarded the Philip Leverhulme Prize for Law in 2014. And most recently, she was the principal investigator for an EU-funded consolidated grant, the Laws of Social Reproduction project. Her upcoming book, Wages for Housework, India's Experiment with Unconditional Cash Transfers to Women, is to be released in July 2026 and published by Oxford Press, analyzes the pros and cons of unconditional cash transfers to women, exploring their role in economic justice. And in the past, she has written extensively on valuing unpaid care labor as well as cash transfers, such as her paper on Assam's Orunodoi cash transfer scheme. We also have with us Varna Sri Raman, who is a development economist and founder of Pinpoint Ventures, which is a development advisory that works on health, education, gender, livelihood, and climate. And we have Aishwarya Govindrajan, journalist and development practitioner writing on gender, child rights, welfare, and lived socio-political realities from the ground in Tamil Nadu. Aishwarya and Varna are the co-authors of our upcoming piece on cash transfers in Tamil Nadu's 2026 elections. So thank you so much to all three of you for joining us today. It is really wonderful and our honor to have you to discuss with you and hear from you. The conversation will be moderated by Bhanu. I'm going to hand over to. Bhanu is our founder and editor-in-chief of Bahin Box. So over to you, Bhanu.
Thank you very much for setting the context so beautifully for this, and also making it so lively, which really means we can quickly jump into the discussion. It's my absolute pleasure to be moderating this session. When we first started talking about cash transfers, I remember this was during 2023 Madhya Pradesh elections when the Ladki, it was called the Ladli Bahin Yojana, which kind of and for us it was like, what is this scheme? And quickly we saw how it propelled the BJP government into power. And before we knew it, 2024, and proliferation of these schemes across states, Maharashtra being the last major example of a cash transfer scheme actually propelling a government to power and so on. So we've been at Bahin Box very interested in the idea of cash transfers, mainly because we also look at women's work, paid, unpaid care infrastructures, and welfare, and the gamut of these things. And so we've often wondered how to situate cash transfers within this large universe, and how do we make a feminist how do we understand it from a feminist point of view? And so the last time I remember that any welfare program that received this sort of a cross section of views and opinions and deliberations was Manrega. That was 25 years ago. Well, is this a fiscal burden? Is this going to change social policy? Is it going to change social behavior really? Is it going to make people more lazy, or all sorts of opinions flew around. And 20 years later, we are grieving the demise of a scheme that was so transformative. So I think these elections, or any elections for that matter, when it presents cash transfers as one of the flagship programs of every political party, almost like a competitive welfareism as we are seeing, it also gives us a chance to discuss them in a more informed sort of way. And so that's why we've put this panel together. So without further ado, as Anjali mentioned, what we do want to discuss really is to situate this cash transfers within the larger feminist discourse of wages for work. I mean, even within the feminist circles, there is so much, there are so many opinions around it. Is this going institutionalize gender division of labor? Is it going to, disincentivize women getting into paid work? And so this really is a moment for us to have a more informed discussion around all of those. And I think no better person than to start this discussion with than Dr. Prabha Koteswaran. Prabha, with all of your work studying cash transfers across states, right? And with your upcoming book, and especially studying cash transfers within the Tamil Nadu context, which really sets the cat among the pigeons, where it is not an ordinary cash transfer. It is framed as a right. How do you situate these varying models of cash transfers, but the larger question of cash transfers within the debate of unpaid domestic care work with paid work, but also within this discourse of cash for wages for work discourse. So please get us started. Help us think about this a little more in an informed way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Bahin Box for actually, just thinking about a feminist election newsroom is just very, very exciting, I have to say. And I want to compliment you really on creating this feminist space where we can think creatively and critically about what I think is a very novel political opportunity, unprecedented as well, I think, in the Indian context. So, of course, the question of cash transfers, right? I mean, the way I look at it, you've already mentioned Tamil Nadu, which says very explicitly, along with a couple of other states, that the cash transfer is recognition not just of unpaid domestic and care work, but also underpaid paid work. So it's quite an expansive understanding, reflecting the reality of our times in several states. And the other states that have rolled out cash transfers have an implicit understanding of this as recognizing the women's role in maintaining the household. So it's not necessarily a savvy or sophisticated understanding of women's unpaid work, but just the kind of idea that bureaucrats and governments have that, if you give money to women rather than to men, somehow it will translate into the welfare of the household. So there is some implicit recognition there, I think, of unpaid work. Now, why we need to think about this is the larger backdrop for this, of course, is that this is not a new issue for feminist scholars and activists for that matter. Feminists have talked about women's unpaid work for hundreds of years. And the question is, even before thinking about the right to vote, actually, is to say, how do we recognize women's unpaid work with a view to dismantling the gender division of labor, not with a view to wanting more of this. So certainly, I think in the Indian context, although you've mentioned wages for housework, and of course, the Wages for Housework campaign of the 1970s itself is heavily misunderstood as arguing for compensating women for doing unpaid work. Anything but, I think. I mean, there's quite complex strands within the Wages for Housework campaign, some of whom did ask for a care income and continue to do so, and some who said actually it's more a political perspective, where we want to underscore the argument that if you want to redistribute care work, you need to first recognize it and recognize the contribution of unpaid work to surplus value generation for capitalists in a capitalist economy. So unless you put a price on something that's invisible, you're not going to be able to change anything against it. So in effect, it's wages for and against housework. That's been sort of the feminist credo, even there in the 70s campaign. But well before that, in the Indian context itself, during the independence movement, very similar arguments were made by feminist nationalists who argued that there should be economic recognition of women's unpaid work with a view to dismantling the gender division of labor. So it's a very sophisticated and nuanced, and I would actually say wages for housework, well before it came up in the West, was articulated in the Indian context. And very interestingly, obviously, for the very same reasons that we see today, I think Indian feminists have not been keen to embrace this agenda necessarily. In fact, any initiatives to recognize women's unpaid work economically has come from the state, whether it was a proposal from the Ministry of Women and Child Development to, give women some control, a portion of the husband's income, for instance, or right now in the context of the cash transfers. But what is also interesting is that along with these developments in the political sphere, we see in the legal sphere, and that's how I came to studying cash transfers, very massive jurisprudence built out by Indian courts where women who were killed in motor vehicles accident cases came to courts, their descendants came to courts and said, well, this woman used to do so much for the household and now she's dead. What do? We need compensation. And courts endorsing the fact that unpaid work is on par with an occupation and that therefore there should be a notional income attributed to it. And now the Supreme Court having said that actually it's only through recognizing this on a legal basis can we realize the constitutional vision of gender equality. So this is a larger framing. And of course, there is the question of the welfare regime, which is not very strong in the Indian context, unlike in the West, as well as the female labor force participation, which is again a huge issue of concern for us.
Can I just follow it up with with your own work on cash transfers around India? How do just as a sort of a like a backgrounder for our audience, we're talking about the Kalaignar Magalir Urimai Toga. All right, let's just call it KMUT and call it Urimai, which is the shorter version, but a much more powerful version of the cash transfer scheme in Tamil Nadu. I think that becomes like as we said, a departure also among the cash transfer schemes in its framing, and this becomes like a way for us to talk also about the framing of it from a state's point of view, as we saw in the Mentimeter activity that we just did, that states, and you said states are implicitly thinking about it when they do cash transfers. But how are, from your own studies, how are women receiving this framing in their when they receive these cash transfers, and how is
Yeah.
it changing anything in their households?
Yeah, I think here again, as you rightly said in the beginning, that states are very different from each other, right? So we've actually studied these cash transfers in a couple of states, and the way women think about it is not uniform. Most women, and I think it's not just true of the cash transfers, but most government schemes, no matter how beautifully named or, articulated or visualized, actually the conceptualization by the bureaucrats doesn't often travel to the ground. Right, in terms of how not just women, but any beneficiaries of the schemes might, in fact, perceive the purpose of the scheme. And that's sort of the story with the cash transfer. So despite the Tamil Nadu scheme being framed in terms of rights, when we looked at the ground, about only 4% of the women that we interviewed, so we had a huge survey of about 2,500 women, very small percentage of them recognized it as in terms of the Urimai Togai, right, saying that this is a rights-based scheme. However, they had sort of an implicit idea of how, because of the welfare regime in Tamil Nadu and its pursuit of gender equality, they had some incipient sense that this is for women's empowerment. And we saw this in other states as well. So sometimes women can't articulate it fully in a fully politically formed way, but they would say it's for women's empowerment. It's for women's use only, right? In a context where women are often expected to use this only for the welfare of the family. Some women did think of it in terms of my own money, right? So there is a huge gap. Even for a state that articulates it in terms of rights, it doesn't actually translate on the ground, and much less so in the case of the other states where, in fact, it's framed in terms of, you're my dear sister, or my dear mother, or my a dear family member, right? And that has to change. That has to fundamentally change. And even when that changes, there's a long road ahead in terms of translating that and giving that meaning in the context of, embedding it in a feminist agenda for care is how I think about it, rather than just a scheme that we will just roll out and it's just a scheme. But something more needs to be done. But it's a good beginning. I think the Tamil Nadu notification is a very good example of how to begin with these cash transfers.
Yeah, now one of the things they very explicitly state is that they are recognizing women's role in social reproduction, which is which when I was reading the guidelines, my mind just boggled that states were like the state of Tamil Nadu was thinking about it in that sort of a manner. But then can I just come to you? I'll come back to you, Prabha. I have a few follow-up questions, but Aishwarya, who has been looking at like talking to women in Chennai and other rural and semi-urban districts in Tamil Nadu, while she was reporting for our story. Aishwarya, what were your key takeaways from when you were speaking to women on how do women see this? Especially the KMUT, the Urimai cash transfer in Tamil Nadu, and what are their expectations of the scheme as they go forward into the next election cycle?
Hello everyone. Like when I traveled to the field for the Behenbach story, so I traveled to the urban cities, like urban resettlement colonies, as well as a few rural villages in districts like Tiruvannamalai.
Yeah, sure.
Even in Chennai, in the outskirts of Chennai, like Samanjeri and Perambakam, and all those are the resettlement colonies. And I have even spoken to a few women in the rural delta districts of Tanjavur and Kadalur and all that. So I could kind of observe a lived contradiction. One thing is like where it helps and to what extent it helps and where it stops. For example, in case of like urban resettlement colonies, uh, they started receiving the amount like in the last 3 months only, like because of like various legal entitlement issues they were facing for a long time, they were not able to receive it, and the government set up a camp especially for these people who didn't receive, and where they applied for the KMUT and then they started receiving it. And the scheme itself was launched like in 2023, much after, like 2 years after it was announced. And if I remember it right, the chief minister signed like one of the few schemes he signed like on the first day he took post as a CM. And one thing is, while interacting with the women in the urban resettlement colonies, what they said is like it is directly going into their, the family needs. Their husbands are not asking like where they are spending it or how they are spending it. It is automatically, they have the autonomy, but it is gendered towards the care of the family and all that. One thing. And when it comes to the rural setup, there were like I could see women, like I could notice, I could hear women like they were able to save some money. Like one of the women, like they saved the 1,000 a month and they got 1 cent of land for them under their name. So they saved it for 5 months. So 1 cent is like 5,000 rupees there in the rural side. So they got it. And another story of like how there is a consumption smoothing that was happening. In one case of a woman named Kanmani, she is actually a flower seller. She used to get it from in wholesale, like in small quantities from a wholesale shop, like say for 100 rupees and all that. So when she had this 1,000 rupees, she was able to get like a 3 kg in bunch. Like, so she could expand her business as well. And she could save the money that some way it was diluting somewhere in hundreds and 200s. So that kind of consumption smoothing was there. One thing. And so and another thing is, in case of urban habitats and urban settlements, they have desire to save it. They want to save it, but almost like 85% or 90% of them are in huge debts. So this amount is going to the debt, and that I could see increased bargaining space for those lenders. Like they know the amount is like being deposited on 15th and they are being there on 15th to get the money, or they even like convince the women to get loan from them because all the speed and meter vatti and all that, the interest, like it's easily available for them. They are going to get like 1 lakh and 2 lakh and all that, so it's easily available for them. And so these kind of contradictions were there when I interacted with the women in the field. Yeah.
So one of the things about the KMUT is that in the universe of cash transfers in India, it is probably the lowest amount, if not, I think perhaps West Bengal. I'm getting mixed up, but it's 1,000 rupees as opposed to say the Ladki Bahin or the Ladki Bahin, Ladli Behna Yojana, and all these other yojanas. And one of the things I remember, we spoke about it, and also appears in your story, is that it also depends on the particular socio-economic condition of the women. And here, Tamil Nadu scheme is like it uses women expansively. It also is for trans women in the state, from what I've read in the guidelines and everything. But that in urban centers it goes to only that much, whereas in rural semi-urban centers women are able to, if not save massive amounts, but they make their money go farther, right? They're able to survive one more day, is how you mention it. But one of the things we did also talk about in Tamil Nadu's case was what do women have what have they articulated to you as to what they would want from this scheme going forward? If whichever party comes to power, this scheme, as Varna calls it, path dependency, will never go away, right? It will only go higher, or it will take probably a different form. But what are women's aspirations as they go into the election cycle with regards to the cash transfers?
Thank you for this question, actually. Like, I have shared this with you many times as well. Like, when I interacted with the women, they were so well articulated in what they need around this scheme, this particular scheme. I feel like this scheme has given them the space to realize their needs, even within the family, even within the community. Like, once you know, give them like Urimai, once you make them understand what is Urimai, the more women are coming forward to talk about what more they need. So in that angle, like the first thing we wanted is like, I mean, in the manifesto, all the parties have like mentioned they'll give 2,000, they'll give 3,000, 3,500 and all that. Apart from that, they had one very valid question. Like, okay, this party is giving me 1,000 rupees. What if someone comes and they are like denying me this 1,000? Because one of the party, like the Nam Tamil Kachis, they are highly against this cash transfer scheme and all. One of their agenda itself is to stop the cash transfer per se. So they demand like legalizing this particular scheme. Legal entitlement. This should be like old age pension or anything. It should be like a legal entitlement. One. And if the government is continuing the scheme, the women demand the amount to be increased. Like one woman named Bashira, she is working among like 3 different households and as a domestic worker, and she's earning 2,500 from each houses. Okay. So for like in one particular house, she is earning 2,500, and for the same work she is doing at her house, she is being recognized with 1,000 rupees. 1,000 rupees is good, but not enough. So she wants something like around 3,000. I mean, they were happy, like I mean, they were so chilled, and they said like, I'll be okay even if with 10,000 if the government gives. I need money. So that was their voice. And another one particular demand is like, even if you give 10,000 or anything, we need more job opportunities to be created. Because if I remember it right, in 2016, when Kalaignar Karnanidhi was there and Jayalalitha was there, one of their manifesto promise was like, the first generation graduates will be given job in the government. And even in the beginning of this particular tenure, like MK Stalin insisted like the first generation graduates will be given priority in the government jobs. So the women are like, give one job per family, like government job per family. We won't need even this 1,000 then, one thing. And another thing is like, they want a workplace to be designed to keep in mind that women are doing some unrecognized, unpaid care work in the home, and they are doing the work as well. Like women, like they are facing mobility constraints and safety constraints at both at like the home as well as in the workplace. One thing, and bias is there, harassment is there, wage gap is there, and this is something a larger issue. They want this to be addressed as well. So another
Also,
thing is,
sorry, Aishwarya, I just have to, intervene in this particular instance because, one of the feminist sort of critiques of cash transfers is whether this is going to disincentivize women from getting into paid work. Would women now not want to? And Prabha, I remember reading in your study also that it is not actually, and that is kind of consistent with what Aishwarya, you're talking about as well, that these are not mutually exclusive things, one of the things about the whole welfare universe is that no one scheme or one thing can solve for every all of the issues before us, but this layered sort of welfare system, schemes and policies enter into existing conditions, socioeconomic conditions, but also within the larger welfare universe as well. On that note, I will have to go to Varna and talk. Varna, you have studied Bihar and MP's cash transfers, right? And I remember you had some very interesting anecdotes from the field you were telling me about in terms of and these are states which have a completely different set of development indicators and women's position there. And so how do you see this? But also along with it, as a development economist, I don't think we can escape the question about the fiscal burden that cash transfers or other schemes have on states, especially stretched ones like Bihar, MP, and so on. So, just these two questions in terms of what is the situation there, but also how can states account for these welfare measures without stretching themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, good questions, I think, Banu, and I wish that there were like sort of easy, answers and straightforward answers to this, but like complex problems. But I think, I mean, sort of, I feel like, when one talks about these schemes in detail, sort of at the state level specifically, one tends to kind of lose sight of the sort of overall framing where it is, which is that, India is a poor country and some states are extraordinarily poorer than others. So, I mean, just to kind of say, 60% of India, for example, is, which is about, I think, 70 crore people. And so at least half of those are women. They earn less than 100 rupees a day. That's the poverty in this country, right? And of those states, Bihar and MP are particularly behind, states like Tamil Nadu. And so that, I think, is what makes the experience of the scheme, aside of, I think, how it's been contextualized in the language that it's being talked of, very different from a Tamil Nadu, because the education levels are very different. The average household poverty is very different. Most households in Bihar and MP, the debt question in household doesn't actually sort of matter as much because there isn't that much formalized lending in any case, right? Most of the lending is informal and the interest rates are sort of insanely high. And so that, I think, is something to sort of like contextualize and think. And of course, in Bihar in particular, I'd say also the framing, I think, is very important because, there are questions around, look, this whole Urimai thing in Tamil Nadu, which is it is a right. But I don't think Stalin was claiming, and neither nor does Tamil Nadu, that, this 1,000 rupees is the totality of the worth of household money. That a woman's household labor is. It's a start. It's like from a brother saying, I'm helping out because I know that we can't formally calculate at this point in time and put a value on your labor, which is very different from the framing, I think, in MP and in Bihar, where it is a dole. It is like a Meri Bahin ke liye Yojana. It's like I'm helping you. And so therefore, I think also agency and mobility is very different, right? Like, because in the debate around sort of like cash transfers is it's really about conditionality versus agency. And there's no question of agency in Bihar and in North India like that, in the way that it is framed for South India. Not to say that in South India it's not constrained. That agency is also constrained, but there's a qualitative difference between the two. One very interesting story from the field that I have is on the, MP sort of Ajivika Yojana, which is also sort of state constrained livelihood asset building. It's called a UCT, but it's actually not, because, it's given out in two parts. And one part of it is, of course, given out at the front. And the idea is that as a woman, you go and buy an asset, right? And many women, actually, and there's a lot of reporting on ground we found, is that they use that money for catastrophic spending, which is, out of pocket spending on health, or, puja and celebrations, weddings, which are a very big thing, that they consider important. And then they didn't buy the asset. And then when the second, bigger amount of 2 lakhs had to be given, the state suddenly said, hey, bring your asset with you. In this case, it was cows. And then there was a whole rush where these women actually had to go and borrow to buy the cows that were supposedly bought already. Right. And there was a mini informal market that was set up because people were short term renting cows from each other for the verification, right? So, I mean, situate that in the language of agency where, can we respect women and say, hey, you know your needs better than, say, like a veterinary officer would, who can come and kind of, assess whether you have the cow or you don't have the cow, right? Like, so that's a completely different question.
Yeah. No, thank you, Varna. I was hoping you'd bring the cow example up because, it's not a derisive thing, but I found it amusing when states design these policies, how short-sighted they are, when they're not looking at all of these other indicators, or keeping that in mind. But at this point, we are really behind, but we would like to, as this is a community initiative and so many people have so many questions, many more than I do. So can we just go to what the questions that the audience here has? And they're very interesting, some of which I tried to bake into my questions to you all as well. But I'm sure there'll be many more. And I'd love to now hear from everyone else and, and for you all to answer these questions. Thank you.
The first question is from Harsha, which is on most women-focused cash transfers are monthly, making them primary consumption smoothing tools. Is there evidence that larger, less frequent transfers, say 4,000 quarterly, is more effective? This question was written specifically for asset acquisition or enterprise investment, but I think you can answer it more broadly in terms of the frequency of cash transfers and what that does for cash transfers. So Prabha, would you, Varna, Prabha, Aishwarya, who would like to take this? Prabha, would you like to take a shot?
Yeah, I think certainly this is a key issue in development economics, and there's been much that's been written about at what level would the cash transfer be useful to build resources. But I think the only state that does that currently in the country is Odisha, where you get 5,000 rupees every 6 months. And I usually have a slide which I show, but where actually women took, because the amount came to them that amount came to them every 6 months, they pooled it together to dredge a local river so that they could engage in aquaculture. So, so there's certainly, anecdotal evidence of the fact that, they are able to use it for something more aspirational, something more transformative. But really, at the end of the day, it is the lowest amount in the country, because that translates into about 830 rupees a month if you look at it, throughout the year.
Varna, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, the other sort of way of doing it is the way that kind of Bihar does it from a public health perspective. So they have something which I think is, kind of the life stage model that I will say. It's like a birth to graduation series sort of model. I think it's a kind of a hybrid. It's a UCT in spirit, but not quite. I think it pays something like 2,000 at birth, and then 25,000 for passing class 12, and then 50,000 for sort of graduation. And the way that they look at it is that it's a human capital kind of investment in education, rather than a sort of very classical liquidity support model, like, say, TN or Madhya Pradesh. So I mean, I'd say that with that kind of idea, Bihar is trying to kind of target a long-term structural exit from poverty. Something like the ultra graduation model for poor that, JPAL, and, it's worked a great deal in Bangladesh and places like that as well. So there is, of course, that model and that idea as well. So there is some evidence around how that is, although it doesn't necessarily fit the classical UCT.
Okay, I have a question for Prabha. This is from Shrimanjori, and Taranga has added to it, which is, how do we determine the amount of wages? So essentially, how do we value something like housework or care labor, unpaid care labor? Time use surveys are something that are commonly used, but what are some of the other ways? And what has been flagged by Taranga is that sometimes even wages as also theft is how Taranga has written it, that no wage is ever enough to cover the full labor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the framing of it in terms of wages is, we can unpack that further, but we have to understand the context in which the argument was made, which was that it's a wage that the men are earning to which the women's unpaid work is contributing, right? So it is in that context you ask for wages for housework to recognize and make visible women's unpaid work. But I think the answer to this question really comes more in the context of the case law, because that's a place where the courts had to decide, you had to, so unlike say in time use surveys. So methodologically, it's very interesting. The time use surveys, unless you're a feminist who's trained the enumerators to ask, a very broad range of questions that captures women's work, women are more likely to underestimate their own work. And question is whether, and there are discrepancies when you ask the man what the women do and the women what they do, there tends to be lots of differences in the way that they view their own labor as counting. Right. But in the context of the case law, the courts they had no choice but to come to a certain amount. And you see a whole range of techniques that they used. One is, some of it is drawn from economics, trying to look at the opportunity cost, and this was typically for the more middle class women, so there were middle class women. The idea was they would have had an education. Had she gone out and worked, she would have made this much. So we will use that to fix the occupation. And sometimes it was the replacement value. In the initial years, it was replacement value, which was much higher, obviously. How much would you pay for someone else to come do this job? Sometimes they just, defaulted to the minimum wage tables. And there again, it was mostly considered to be unskilled work, right? And sometimes they also looked at the partnership principle. And sometimes they just had a fixed amount. So there is actually a whole range of ways in which judges decided to compensate the loss of services to the family. And it has, it's all coded in terms of the caste status, the class status of the women, their education. So intergender distributive outcomes are very mixed and problematic. But I think at least there is an archive of, how do we actually compensate women's unpaid work. So I think that's a useful place to look at, to see that if we did actually begin to value women's work, what would be the consequences for everyone concerned. And in some instances, it wasn't just women who died. It was also women who had been permanently disabled. And it's interesting, you find compensation also for reproductive labor. Like if they lost a fetus, there would be compensation for that. And otherwise it would be very problematic in another area of law. But in this area of law, they did actually compensate the dependents.
If you have any suggestions for things people can maybe dabble in, read in, on understanding more on how exactly compensation is valued, where that valuation comes from, I think that would be very interesting for our audience. Varna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think if people are looking up, then you may also want to look at how, say, what genres and others have done when they've tried to work on this. It's called the shadow price of unpaid labor. That's a methodology as well. What the shadow price of unpaid labor is basically the implicit market value that the economy assigns to unpaid work when it kind of sort of like models household production. There are papers on this, and it's what genres and many others have actually used when they try to estimate things like the care economy, which is kind of structurally invisible in GDP, in traditional GDP accounting. So that's another point of view to look at.
Thank you for sharing that. There are three questions which I think all tie into the similar logic of how does the state view cash transfers. There's a question from Pinky Bobs, Netra, and Rakhi, who are asking about fiscal burden. How do we understand? I think also useful to unpack this idea of fiscal burden on the state when it comes to something like welfare and rights, and what are people owed from the state. And what does the state owe people, and what does it kind of get off of its plate when it gives cash transfers? What does it say it no longer is responsible for after giving a cash transfer? That is a question that's come in. So, Prabha, would you like to start? And then perhaps if Aishwarya or Varna have any points you could add in.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a feminist perspective, we don't want this to, I don't want to view this as a zero-sum game, but obviously each state has its own profile in terms of, huge range in terms of the debt and what they can, what is being cut down. And, that's something that we have to really look at very closely. But I think the fear on the left has always been the cash transfers would replace, the existing welfare regime. And because for whatever reason, in this instance, because it's coming up at the state level, and it would be very difficult to roll back. So if you see all the states that did implement cash transfers in the 2021 round, they've merely increased it. Nobody's really talked about cutting back. And, and you would also think that they would promise just one thing and not the whole range of other welfare initiatives, and they haven't actually substituted them. So there is something about political calculations here, which it seems to suggest that they will not roll it back. But even if they, to prevent that from happening is why we need to embed it in a right to care law is what we would like to argue. So I don't think of it as a zero-sum game. And I think, as Bhanu already said, very similar arguments were made when NREGA was proposed several years ago, which is that when you are in a phase of expanding the post-colonial sort of welfare regime, right, these questions are going to be asked about, what are you going to cut back in order to make room for this? Thinking about it as feminists, we do not think this is a replacement for anything. So we're very clear about that.
Can I just add to that and ask if, as feminists, we may not, but do you suppose the state might, considering that, well, we are giving you 3,000, so no more investments needed, especially as we are also batting for more care infrastructure in terms of to kind of augment women's paid care work, paid work, really. So is there a danger like that?
Yeah, of course, one could always argue that, but if you actually look at the cost of care infrastructure, it's not very high. Like Karnataka has the rural creche scheme, and it's actually just a drop in the ocean. It's eminently feasible. So you don't actually have to, if anything, it's the cash transfers that are the most expensive line item, right? Many a time compared to the other schemes for women. And so I don't think it's either or. I think you could definitely invest in the care infrastructure. I mean, what states might do, and here again, it completely depends on the what my colleague Louise Dillon calls the subnational welfare regime. In certain regimes, some states are more neoliberal than the others. And this is why I think of very clear-eyed feminist analysis of these cash transfer schemes is really, really critical to make sure that, the rationalization of welfare or, even at the electoral moment, maybe it won't happen at the campaign level, but soon after there might be a drive to rationalize schemes so that you lose something or the other. And some states do that. So I think we just have to look very carefully at it to see what are the distributive outcomes, really. And then there are states which go even further, right? The Karnataka model is really looking at universal basic services. And there you see how you can accelerate the potential of the cash transfers by looking at free transport. And many states are doing fare free travel for women. So that's another interesting way in which you're enabling women's labor force participation and so on. So there's a whole rich array of options. So I think we shouldn't get caught into the zero-sum game debate. I think instead we need to be very beady-eyed about how we want to assess the full range of possibilities. And there are some really creative policies that states have come up with.
Actually, I wanted to add, this particular question about the further policy feminist lens would be made. I shared a report by the State Planning Commission, how the impact assessment actually. So whatever they have done and the outcomes, it doesn't have a feminist lens per se. One particular theme they were focusing on is around only the confidence level. The confidence level of the women receiving the amount has increased, and no more feminist lens beyond that. So it is sitting there as a welfare scheme. I think the longevity of the scheme depends on how grand the scheme itself is. Like the state started the free rice scheme in 1967, and the PDS system is still existing. So it depends on how smart the whole government is. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I have a last question, and I know our community members probably have way more questions. Please do hold on to them. You can send them to us, and we will send them across to our speakers and send you their response. But the last question that I want to ask all three of you and is a question by Harsha on why cash transfers work so differently in party politics across different states. So they've said that, for example, they have yielded political dividends in states like Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal, and they are like a key electoral factor in these states. But why does this not translate into electoral success in a state like Andhra Pradesh? Why are parties facing defeats despite providing cash transfers? Would anyone like to start?
Well, I have to say I'm a bit skeptical about that causal claim to begin with. And if you read very carefully what the political scientists say, people like Rajeshwari Deshpande and so on, don't actually think that this is what is translating into, parties coming into power, especially when all the parties are now offering cash transfers. It's very hard to, kind of inhabit the magic of, why do people vote? And so I think, that's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you what we ask women about this, right? Admittedly, we ask them a year after, because we're assessing the scheme. So we're asking them at least a year after the elections are over and the scheme has been implemented. And they have a far more nuanced understanding of why they vote for a particular party. And the cash transfers are not the reason that they vote. That's what they tell us anyway, by a huge majority, to say that that's not the reason why they're voting for any particular party. But it's a question of, it could be, it's a question of when you ask them, because all the people who advise political parties seem to think that the minute they announce this, they see greater support for their candidates. That's what they say. But I'm actually very skeptical about it.
I do remember right after the Maharashtra election win of the Mahayuti government, everyone was going to town about how Ladki Bahin played a role. And I do remember our correspondent Priyanka speaking with Rajeshwari Deshpande and I think even Suhas Palsikar, who said it is much more complex than that. And this is where a lot of cadre building and much more localized factors play a role rather than just cash transfers drove the parties to power. So yes. Sorry, one of you, Varna, was it you who was saying, who had something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just saying that I think I agree that I think there's a lot more complexity, at play. And, since this is a conversation about cash transfers, even within cash transfers, it's not clear whether, what the effect is, electorally speaking. For example, if you look at, like, this is not AP, but it's like Telangana. But if you look at what happened with the Raitu Bandhu, scheme there, the cash transfer clearly has like a caste related link in terms of borrowings and what it does to status. So it's not as though everything is kind of based on how much money disposable income there's a timing issue, and I think that influences a little bit, but it's very hard to causally say that. So yeah.
And adding to both of you, so in 2016, when I was covering the elections, so there was this one particular, politician who, in a lorry container, he shifted around some 2.35 crores to give us, to bribe the voters. So it was illegal giving, money to the people to was like illegal in 2016. So 10 years down the lane, like people are demanding it to be like legalized, legal entitlement. And answering this particular question, like as Professor Prabha said, like cash alone won't decide whether the party wins or not. When it comes to Tamil Nadu, it is series of many schemes that is put in place that is making a party a success. For example, we have like girl child protection scheme, like Chief Minister's girl child protection scheme, that they offer 18,000 when a family has like two girl children to support their education. They can only withdraw the amount only when the girl child like attains the age of 18, and it will be used for higher education, one thing. And we have Pudumai Pen scheme, wherein a girl child studying in a government school will be deposited 1,000 every month, which she can use it for her higher education, one thing. And including Delhi, and here we have free bus services for women. Like, so all these are like some way connected, like the ultimate welfare. And as I said, the welfare didn't start here like in 2016 or early 2000. It started in 1960s when Chief Minister K. Kamaraj, sworn in as minister. So it has a history. Welfare has a history. So I think that is what makes the system work, and that is how the parties win here. Yeah.
I think that's true in every state, I suppose. Like when I remember the last time in 2016, people were rushing to attribute Mamta's win to the Kanyashri Prakalpa scheme at that point. I think we all need easy answers also, like something to latch on to and say, hey, this is why women voted. It then also negates our agency as active citizens also, and political thinkers who can and look beyond all of these things. But also, as we have been talking about that welfare, and I think Sharad put it in his comments, that welfare in a layered sort of it's a layered system, and in each of the states, and a lot of these, and then of course there are other political considerations and so on, because of which parties come to power, and anti-incumbency being a big part. And of course, these days there are other considerations such as the Hindutva project and so on. But on that note, I do really, really thank you for your time, for allowing us to go over 15 minutes over the last over what we had discussed, and for the entire community to be so engaged. This is why when we started doing the feminist election newsroom, we were like, how do we make it a more engaging process? And we've seen this day when it is such an engaging process, and it couldn't have been without the participation of all of the members who are part of the FEN. But you need like these active charioteers who carry the mission across. And for us, from the side of Bahin Box, all of our team, and especially Pallavi here and Anjali here, who's been moderating the whole event. In fact, they have worked really, really hard at the back end to work to bring all of this together, and I can't be thankful enough to all of them and to the entire team at that I have the pleasure of working with every day. But thank you, Prabha, for so kindly agreeing to come and talk to us about, despite your schedule. I know how busy academics in the UK are. I see that every day. And so for you to take out time and discuss, the cash transfers and we really look forward to your book. Varna and Aishwarya, thank you so much for doing that incredible extensive report, which is going to come out on Thursday. Please look out for it. Both of them have worked really hard in bringing us the real truths from Tamil Nadu and across as well, and putting it all in a framework in which we can understand cash transfers better, not just as either a dole or a fiscal burden or a handout from a brother to sister or father to mother or whatever that is. And so I'm so glad we had a real feminist informed discussion, and I hope you all felt the same. But if there are any more questions that we have been unable to answer, we would love to pick the brains of the three experts here, but also other people who we think can answer them as well, add more diversity to opinion and so on. So that is me, but I will hand it over to Anjali and Pallavi if they have other things to say, because they've worked really hard. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you so much, everyone. I just learned a lot. I love being, surrounded by people who just know infinitely more than me, and this has been incredible. I've always especially been curious if they actually shapes women's voting patterns, and I really like the way you explained, Prabha, that you would be skeptical about that causation and what you're hearing when you follow up with women, which really adds up. Our idea of कि इनको पैसे दे दो and ये वोट डाल देंगे, it's there is a elitism, classism distance to the reality, to the ground, where, like you said, they have a much more nuanced understanding of what they want from the leaders who represent them. Thanks so much also, Varna and Aishwarya. And everybody else, you're on our WhatsApp group. If you would like to continue the conversation well into the night on cash transfers, I mean, I won't wait. I won't stop you. And if you have any other questions, we were in touch with these three incredible people, and we'll happy to help you get the answers. So I think on that note, it's almost 10 for a lot of people. So let's call it.
Thank you so much, Prabha, Aishwarya, and Varna for joining. I'm also sharing across the Google form link in the chat, just in case you aren't part of the Feminist Election Newsroom group yet. You can sign up there and then we'll add you to the WhatsApp group. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and we aren't done with elections yet. And there is stuff coming post-elections also. So, voting happens, but then there are results and what are the alt agendas that we want parties to take up, at that time, the government's in question to take up. So please be engaged, and we'd love to hear more from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And good night wherever you are.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you and good night. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.